Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who is listening to this on the Temple Beth Am podcast. We have a new student today. Paul, do you want to quickly introduce yourself to this group some of whom have been in this class for about 15 years? I'd love to hear.
I realize I'm stepping into a group of old friends here. My name is Paul Sullivan. I'm a Jew. I'm here in Natchez, Mississippi. I think some people from your temple came through here several years back, maybe before COVID, and had volunteered.
It was 2 years ago, Paul. It was 2020. It was 2022. We were supposed to go We were supposed to go 2020. The trip got delayed, and we made it in 2022.
Excellent. So I'm taking y'all up on your offer to allow us in our small congregation in the hinterlands of Mississippi to participate in y'all's activities out there. I've been studying Hebrew for about 4 years. I can read it okay with the dictionary handy, and I'm really excited to be a part of this group. I've been lurking, watching recorded sessions of it, so I'm really glad to be here. Thank y'all so much.
Paul, it's great to meet you. My best her name is Terry, who is involved in your community, who I have a picture of.
Yes, Terry Tillman.
Up in my office. And the offer was a good one that really anything that we do at Temple Beth Am, from services to learning, is open to you and any member of your community with our great blessing. So we felt we developed a nice connection with your community. We were there, and it's just great to have you here. So
it's great to be here. And
as I said to you in the email, if you feel like in the beginning you're drowning, you're in good company, because there are people around the table and on Zoom who've been studying text in the original for decades, and there are people for whom they're still trying to figure out, exactly how to decode how the word sounds. There's a whole array. The conversation is in English. Please jump in, raise your digital hand if you want to say something, and all levels of comments are welcome. We're so happy that you're here. Rebecca, while you're up, can you close those windows if you can? I take some elbow grease because they're stuff, but it's very loud outside. I don't know if you can hear that on Zoom, but it's very distracting. Okay, last week we had our siyum. We finished Parshat Va'era. We took over/under bets on how long it would take for us to finish Parshat Bo. I have conveniently forgotten all those numbers so that I don't unintentionally and unconsciously engineer it so that I win. We all win. Everyone's a winner. Okay, we read the first verse of Parshat Bo last week. We didn't do the Rashi. I'm going to read it again and then assign someone to read the Rashi. And as I said, Parshat Bo is going to pick off, obviously, where Parshat Va'era left off. Originally, the Torah did not have parashot, right? This is ex post facto. So we're hanging out between the 7th and the 8th plague. And then, just to give you the long view, we discussed this last week, by the time we finish Parshat Bo, we're going to be out of Egypt. So there's a lot that's going to happen in this parsha. Okay, it's chapter 10 of the book of Exodus, verse 1, first verse of Parshat Bo. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. Simple enough. God said to Moses, Bo el Paro, go to Pharaoh. If you look at the Onkelos there, the Aramaic, Onkelos translates the Bo as ul. You might think that means go up, because you might think that the ayin lamed in Aramaic is like the ayin lamed in Hebrew. It's not. Ul means to enter. So what I think Onkelos is doing there is that Bo is a strange word here. In modern English, you can say come when you mean go, right? In fact, Susan, my assistant, likes to correct me that all the time. She's like, you should not say come if you're actually meaning go, and vice versa. They mean different words, but in English we interchange them. And Onkelos is saying something similar by translating it that way. It's not come, it's actually go towards, right? So he translating it as enter into ul levat paro, go towards Pharaoh. Ki ani hichbadati et libo, for I have hardened, made more severe. Choose your synonym for kaved. This is in the hif'il, right? The direct causative. We've had a lot of versions of this verb where is Pharaoh doing it to himself? Is it happening kind of spontaneously? This is clear that the Torah is saying, I did it to him. I hichbadati. I am the causer of the kvod, of the heaviness of his heart, et libo, his heart. V'et lev avadav, and also the heart of his servants. And now we have a little bit of a window. We've had several of them before where God lets it seep out that there is more than one reason why all this is happening. Laman, in order that if we were reading this for the first time, which none of us is, we might have wondered what's the in order that? Why would God want to extend and perpetuate his people's enslavement, right? Because the hardening of the heart leads to more time in Egypt. Laman, in order that shiti ototai ela bekirbo, that I shot. Shin taf or shin vav taf means to place. Rashi is going to give us more on that. That I place ototai, my signs, the plural of ot. Ot is a sign, like in Vishamro, ot hi li'olam. Shabbat is a sign forever between us and God. Ototai ela, these signs, bikirbo, in his midst. Interesting, Onkelos translates the bikirbo as beinehen, among them, and he doesn't use the Aramaic root for karo, for like the insides. He just, sometimes Onkelos makes a very mild commentary when he's translating by not translating it directly into Aramaic. And by the way, translators today, right? You have, every time you translate, you have to make a decision. Am I using the closest synonym to this verb, or am I using a word that gives the sense that I think this sentence was trying to give? Okay, before we jump into Rashi, we'll see if there are any comments. I saw Rick's hand up. I see Norm's. Rick, is your hand up still? Again, accidental?
I was just going to say that we had Ul a bunch of times before. I looked back to see how Onkelos did Bo, and we've had it before. That's all.
Got it. Thank you. Joel, can you see if you can up the volume, or is it at the top? Just so the people in the room can hear the people in the Zoom better. It may be at the top. I don't know.
It's on the back of the speaker.
On the back of the speaker? Okay. Norm and then Diane Larry. Let's take the microphones off the, Leonard, can you take the microphone off the stand?
Just take it off the stand.
Well, you can take it off the stand, but you can leave it there for now. Okay, Norm.
It's really interesting to hear your explanation of Ichbadati es lebo, because Silverman translated, I have allowed his heart to be hardened, which is different from I hardened it, or I caused it to harden.
That's his translation of the verse.
Of the verse.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's an odd choice. It's like there's got to be a reason for that choice, but it seems to be motivating that choice is a hesitation or an unease with what we've talked about since we began this narrative of, let's say it one more time, God causing a thing for which Pharaoh was punished, right? So the allowing seems to be, I didn't stop it from happening, or it was actually happening inside of him and I permitted it, rather than I forced him to sin and punished him for the sin. It's an interesting choice. Diane Larry?
Well, just to continue that for a second, Alter emphasizes the point by translating it as, for I myself have hardened his heart. Which, when we speak like that, we say I myself, or we're emphasizing who's responsible. So Alter disagrees with Silverman completely, as does,
go ahead.
As does Kaplan, who says, I have made him and his advisors stubborn.
I've made his advisor stubborn. Interesting. Yeah.
But that's not what I raised my hand for. You may dismiss this question. I'm just wondering where the meaning of kaved as liver comes from, because Diane jokingly said, or she didn't say this, I'm going to say it. You can translate this as, I have liverized his heart. I've turned his heart into liver. But I'm wondering if liver maybe was considered to be a hard organ or something like that, or am I completely off base?
You're not off base in terms of the pluripotency of the Hebrew root kaf bet dalet, right? So we've discussed this several times. There's a really wonderful thing to explore between the notion of honor. I've discussed this actually several times recently, honor, kavod, and heaviness, because in our tradition, our etymological tradition, honor has a certain weight, right, and sobriety to it, right? It's not just a celebration. I could look quickly at BDB to see if he believes that the root kaved, which is biblical, it's actually Torahitic, is related or an entirely different root. Sometimes the etymologists believe that it's just same letter, different root that happens. Let me share that and we'll explore together. So this is BDB. It's on the screen. Oops, where are you? Where'd you go? All right. And let's see what he says. So the root kaved, be heavy, weighty, burdensome, be honored. So he says that certainly the weightiness and the burdensomeness is the same root. Let's see what he says about liver. This is the same entry. Same entry. Kaved, adjective, heavy. Yeah, see, according to BDB, oh, look at that. Okay, so
heavy organ.
Yeah, so he gives it a different entry. He defines it as liver, it's a they, explained by Fess, I forgot who Fess is, some previous etymologist, as the heavy organ, par excellence of the body. And that in Aramaic, it's kabdo, Arabic, it's kabidun. I have no reason to not believe that, or akbadu, anything large, thick in the middle. So there does seem to be a connection, at least according to this entry. Yeah. Tova.
No, I was just thinking, because in many cultures, including Egypt, they used organs as oracles, and the liver was one of the ones that was most frequently used as an oracle. So they were very familiar with the relative size and appearance of it, which does kind of dominate the body in a way, but also this sense that it foretold things, that it was somehow connected in a way that allowed you to foresee things.
By weight and volume, the liver is the biggest internal organ in the torso, right? It's significantly bigger than the heart. Yeah. Rosemary?
In Persian, most of the compliments to the beautiful woman, or if we like it, we call it my liver.
Really?
Yeah. It's kind of a compliment to a girl which is beautiful.
Huh. Learning all these things. Leonard, can you get me a paper towel over there? Just give me a paper towel.
I just want to say that we have the same thing in English, where you have both the weight and the honor in the same word, and the word gravitas.
Great. Wonderful. I think that's a perfect English rendering of kaved, kavod. Wonderful. Marshall and then Tova. And then we'll look at Rashi.
Going back to Larry's comment that altered translated is I myself, I think he gets the idea from the way that the trope system works. For Bayomer, Adonai El Moshe.
Marshall, I'm sorry, only Rick's allowed to do a trope, Josh. I have a 5-year contract with him on that. Right,
I'm going to trip if I try to trope through it. Okay. So Bayomer, Adonai El Moshe, Bo El Paro, pause. And then the next trope is a Gir Shayim, which is disjunctive also. Ki ani, pause.
Yeah, that's really great.
Thank you, Rick, for the inspiration.
I myself have hardened his heart. Yeah, very good. See, Rick, you're slipping. You're slipping, Rick. You let Marshall figure that out before you did.
No, I was inspired by Rick's example.
Was it Tova's hand? Yes.
I just had a question about Onkelos uses yakarit instead of hikbadti. Is that correct?
Yes. So
what does that mean?
Yes. So yakar is another word which can mean expensive. It can mean dear, and it can mean weighty. Right. All that. It's a totally different root than kaved, but it has similar tributaries coming off of it. Yeah. Okay, I want to because I want to share with you and read to you Everett Fox's translation, because it's similar to one of the ones that Larry read. He always translates Adonai as in English YHWH. Said to Moshe, "Come to Pharaoh." So he leaves the bow as "come." Right? He's using English vernacular rather. He's being precise to the Hebrew word, and he recognizes that in English vernacular, you can say that. For I have made his heart and the heart of his servants heavy with stubbornness, hyphenated. So he wants to do it in one word because he's very careful about translating word for word, and heavy with stubbornness is the verb is how he renders hichbadati into English. So he's combining the heaviness with the notion of heavy meaning stubborn. I have made his heart and the heart of his servants heavy stubbornness, different than the Silverman that Norm read before, that Pharaoh is taking full responsibility for it. Okay. Anything else on this verse itself? Okay. Joanne, are you? Oh, yes, Tova.
It just occurred to me in parsing this, that final part that is sort of theologically challenging, with God taking responsibility. Could we because just previously we read, the whole saga of Pharaoh claiming they had sinned, repented, please do this for us, I promise I'll send you out. And then his heart became kaved, became heavy, and then he hardened it, where it really seemed to be, the agency seemed to be with Pharaoh. And so now we're reading this, and could it be understood rather that he allowed it to be hardened in the sense that God would have had the power to prevent Pharaoh going through this personal journey, so to speak, but chose not to, rather than he actually caused it to happen, whatever Pharaoh might have wanted.
It's a fascinating comment, Tova, particularly because as a shul goer and as a Torah reader, I do think of the material in parsha slots, right? I rarely just read chapter 9 of Exodus into chapter 10 of Exodus, right? And I know how Parshat Bo begins, but you're right that the last two verses of Va'era, if you go back to it, the Torah seems to be making it clear this is not God doing it, right? Verse 34, by Yosef lachto, he continued to sin, vayach beid libo, which again is hard to translate in terms of like which binyan that is, but his heart either he hardened his heart or his heart got hardened, and then verse 35, vayechazak leif paro, and the heart of Pharaoh strengthened or hardened again. So we have two phrases seeming to suggest that is happening spontaneously or internally with Pharaoh. And then verse 1 of the next chapter says that God is doing it, which gives more of an explanation as to why Silverstein would say, yeah, don't forget the last two verses. Did it, meaning didn't stop it from happening. Could have, but didn't. Rosemary?
I'm just wondering, normally nations are separated by religion, by language, or something in common, in difference between them. So if we take the Israelites in Egypt, what did they have? They didn't have Shabbat. They didn't have any rules. They didn't have anything. So what was it just separation of class? They were slaves. The other ones weren't.
You mean what kept them coherent as a people while they were enslaved?
Right. And what kept them that God went back to them? But what did they have in common to practice, to identify?
In the text itself.
Just to say, Abraham was my great-grandfather.
In the text itself of the Torah, all we have is that. All we have is that they are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God made a promise to them. That's all the Torah tells us, right? The Midrash fills it in. The Midrash... what's that? Of course, they're studying Gemara, and they were building eruvs and mikvahs and celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut. The rabbis, there's several parallel midrashim that talk about what were the mitzvot that they kept in Egypt, as it were, right? Don't worry about the anachronism, because even though the Torah wasn't given yet, the rabbinic imagination is that our ancestors observed these mitzvot. In the same way that the Gemara loves to imagine all the mitzvot that Queen Esther was observing in the palace. And there are several themes in those midrashim. One is that they kept their names, right? They didn't allow their names to be Egyptianized. Another is that they kept the laws of family purity, right? That they somehow found a way to observe the separation between husband and wife during certain times of the month. And another is that they kept Shabbat, right? And these are the rabbis, in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd century CE, clearly projecting back into a prehistory and pre-giving of the Sinai moment, a way of elevating what are the things that are going to preserve our community in exile, right? So every midrash is a sermon. So a rabbi in Pumbedita, Babylonia in the 4th century, by imagining that the slaves in Egypt kept their names, he's basically saying to all you people who are naming your children after Babylonian gods, don't do that. Keep your Hebrew names because that's what kept us in Egypt. And same about Shabbat and same about family purity. It's all sermonica. We get it as if it's just learning, right? That's how it's preserved to us. But it was a rabbi getting up and giving a drash, right? And trying to convince his community to do something to preserve Judaism, which, by the way, is it's a version of what I do every week, right? On some level, everything that I say, everything is intended to induce and invite the members of our community to hold on to and preserve the Jewish identity of us in the next generation. I mean, there are thousands of shades of that. That's what I'm still trying to do using the text. So, but in the text itself, all we have is that it was a shared narrative and genealogical identity. Rick, and then we're going to look at the Rashi.
Hi. So thank you for the trope stuff, and Marshall, you do great with that too. So that's a great thing.
High praise.
Yeah. For Paul and all the Mississippi people, I just want them to know also that since we're dealing with the heaviness and all that in Egypt, at the end of your life, your heart was part of the whether you would go to heaven or not, and whether it was heavy, you wouldn't go if it was full of sin. So this is also a play on what the Egyptians thought about the afterlife, and Pharaoh wasn't going to go to the good place with all this heavy stuff on his heart. So I just wanted to catch them up with that too.
Thanks, Rick. Paul, I see you unmuted. You want to add something?
Oh, no, I was just going to say I've been listening to you talk about this, Rick, for several weeks, and I appreciate that. I surely do. Yeah, the whole Egyptian insight has been quite interesting and useful to me.
Before we even get to all of the content-based contributions that Paul will add to this class, it's just nice to have a new accent around this table. I mean, to study Torah with a Mississippian, that's just really
y'all.
Yeah, wait till you hear my Hebrew, Rabbi.
I can't wait. All right.
God, yes, he's got to do the second sentence. Yes.
Okay. Joanne, are you at a place where you can read a Rashi?
I am. I have no video today, but I'm happy to read Rashi. Something seems to be wrong with my video.
Okay, so let's read. It's a very short Rashi. So if you want credit, you can keep going on the next verse too. But let's see what he says. And before you start, this is a great Rashi to practice our skill set of determining what's the problem in the verse that Rashi is trying to solve, because it seems like he's just saying something plain. So what was troubling him, right? There's a whole series. What's bothering Rashi, right? So why does he feel the need to say this, which is different than what's the content of what he's saying?
Vayomer Hashem el Moshe bo el Paro v'hatrev bo.
What does hatrem mean? Anyone know? Joanna, do you know what the root taf resh hey or hey taf resh hey means?
Is a warning, right?
A warning, right? Okay. So this first comment of Rashi is 2 words, right? And what do we make of it? So, what's the question to which Rashi's answer is? The meaning is and warn him. Marshall has a thought, and then Norm.
Why did Moses come to Pharaoh? What was the purpose? What was the matara of coming to Pharaoh?
To which I would ask, what's the havamina? What else might we have thought such that Rashi is to say, no, it doesn't mean that. It means go and warn him.
Did Pharaoh ask Moses to come to him? Maybe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe this is Rashi saying, lest you think God is saying, go to Pharaoh because he wants you. I'm saying go to Pharaoh once again as my representative and warn him that more bad stuff is coming. Okay, Norm?
I was going to say the same.
Same thing. Okay. Anything else? Anything else that we can pull out of Rashi saying? Because, like, as a reader of Pshat, I say, thanks, Rashi. That doesn't add much, right? Which means I probably am misunderstanding Rashi, right? I take it upon myself to say that if I think that Rashi's comment is too self-evident, the problem is with me and not Rashi. Now, I could be wrong. Sometimes Rashi might be just saying something self-evident, but we've learned, or we've ascribed to Rashi a very specific intentionality such that we have to keep searching for what might be bothering him if it seems that it's too obvious. Diane, Larry?
I don't know if I have the alternative, but I'm looking in the context of the last verse of the previous Aliyah, the previous chapter, which says that Pharaoh's heart toughened and he did not send off the Israelites. Israelites, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. So I would have thought that he would be sending him to simply not to warn him, but to tell him, to remind him to send out the Israelites, to let the people go.
Right. But there's no as opposed to what, right? That's the thing that seems to be missing here. And I'm not suggesting I have the answer, but that all of the attempts to make sense of Rashi are lacking because if had Rashi not said this, we might have thought that, right? And that's a very common way of thinking in Jewish text. So the Aramaic is the hava amina, what I might have said. I see Joanna's hand and I see Rebecca's hand.
Can I just add one more thing?
You may add two more things.
Well, I only have one for the moment, but I'm
giving you space for two.
Up till now, though I haven't gone back to look at it, you've got a plague, then the Pharaoh doesn't do what he's supposed to do, and Moses comes back and says there's going to be another plague. So the pattern is going on. But this time, and maybe this is what Rashi meant, is the warning was, that's it. You've used up your chances because the next one's going to be the big one. At the end of the road here.
Okay, give me one more sentence so I make sure I understand the point you're making.
The next plague is going to be the plague that's going to break Pharaoh's back, so to speak. It's going to be the plague that we don't know that reading the story up till now, but we've had the 9th plague, and the 10th plague is going to be the last one. So the warning would be not something bad is going to happen, is you've used up all of your chances.
Right, but we're between plague 7 and 8 here. We just finished hail. We're about to get locust.
Sorry, for some reason I thought we were in Choshech already. We already done Choshech.
We're living through a moment of Choshech, but we're not in the narrative of Choshech. Joanna, Tova, Norm.
I'm going to say that back to the discussion earlier about that strangeness, a little bit of Bo El Paro and not Lech El Paro. Why Bo? To me, when I read Bo, it implies a sense of like, come close, go close to Paro. And why do that? To warn him a little more privately. Don't warn him publicly. Give him a private warning. And as a teacher, I will say that when I need to discipline kids or have kids turn around in some way, it's much more effective if I can find the moment to talk to them privately than if I do it publicly in front of the whole class.
That's the most compelling explanation I've ever heard for what Rashi's saying here, besides the obvious, that it's almost that the choice of Bo is, rather than reading God here as kind of imperious, read God as somewhat compassionate, meaning I could just bring the next plague, which I've done before. I'm telling you, Moses, go towards Pharaoh because I, God, have softened my heart and I'm willing to give him another warning, right? I'm willing to warn him again rather than smite him immediately. That's really lovely. Is that what Rashi meant? Who knows? But I really like that explanation. Tova and then Norm. And then Rebecca. Oh, Rebecca, go ahead.
Since this time, unlike the previous pattern, God doesn't tell Moses the next plague to tell him. We'll see in a few verses, Moshe seems to just declare the plague on his own. I think Rashi here, in giving an explanation why Moshe is going, can't say he's going to talk about the next plague because God didn't command him to do that. So Rashi perhaps gives just a general reason he's going to warn him. So he has to give a general thing that it's okay if Moshe on his own thought about going to warn him.
Great. I would say Baruch Shech Kivant, blessed be the one who kind of anticipated what someone else said. The Mizrahi, which is one of the classic commentaries on Rashi, says something similar, that the because doesn't work in the sentence so well. The because of key. Go to Pharaoh because I've hardened his heart. No, that's not why you're going to Pharaoh. You're going to Pharaoh to go do the next round of negotiations, right? Which is connected to the fact that he's hard as hard, but that's not the direct because. And since we're not going to get to the content of that till verses 3, 4, 5, 6, Mizrahi says, Rashi's saying, right, that to connect the why I'm sending you to Pharaoh to what you're going to do when you're in Pharaoh's presence, which is not explained by the Kiani Ichbadati, Rashi says, Bihi Trabo. And basically, Mizrahi saying that Rashi's saying, if you read a few verses later, you would know that's what's going to happen. But since you might be reading this for the first time, I'm putting it in there. That's what Hitrabo means. I still think that Joanna's explanation is more elegant than the Mizrahi's, but Rebecca, you basically went in that direction. I wanted you to know that you were connected to a great commentator. Tova, Norm, Marshall.
What Rebecca said.
What Rebecca said. Norm. By the way, before Norm speaks, I think everyone saw this, but I want to make sure, I should have started this way, that we should dedicate our study today to Rachel's brother who died suddenly and tragically last week. And Rachel's obviously not here in class today. She's in a period of aninuta, a pre-mourning, as we were waiting to figure out the details and the logistics of his funeral in Shiva. And Rachel, I know you're not hearing this, but Norm, you're hearing this, and hopefully you'll convey to her that our hearts are heavy, no pun intended, for what your family is going through. And we pray that her brother's memory will be a great blessing to you and your family. And as he already has shown himself to be to so many people in Los Angeles and beyond who've come out to express their condolences on his loss. So Yehi Zichro Baruch.
I certainly shall. And it's been incredible, the extent of attention that it's gotten. It was on NPR. It was in newspapers in England. Really amazing.
Baruch Dayan Emet to Rachel.
Early 60s, right?
He was 64.
Yeah.
He was in seemingly good health. He went hiking with his son recently and their Boy Scout troop. He used to do bicycle riding to San Diego and back over a few day period. He worked out, he was seemingly in very good health, but the Reubens don't have great hearts, the physical kind. Emotionally, they are terrific people. I'm lucky to be married in that family.
Amen.
Zilberman says, Rashi first explains the meaning of the word shis, to put.
That's the next comment.
And then he points out that the suffix shisi.
That's the next comment. We haven't read that yet.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
But hold that thought. Joanna, is your hand up again or still?
Sorry, not again.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so I'm making a slight second go at what I said before because I just read the Alter comment. And here's what Alter says without referring to Rashi. He said, this is the first time that God informs Moses before his audience with Pharaoh that he hardened, once again, the literal sense made heavy, the heart of the Egyptian monarch. I'm just saying, I didn't realize that God had not told Moses that he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So now put ourselves in the sense that now we know that Moses knows something he didn't know before. Alter goes on. This is a signal that the elaborate toying with Egypt is approaching the end game. Pharaoh is showing himself ever more fiercely recalcitrant, and the plagues are becoming more fearful as we draw near the last plague. And the last plague,
Okay, so just wait outside.
Pharaoh's will. So in a sense, that's his answer to why, to Rashi's comment about this is a warning. We're getting serious now. We're not messing around anymore.
Meaning it's a warning and not just the warnings that we've seen before, but it's like almost like an intensification of the warning and God communicating to Moses before Moses goes to Pharaoh, like telegraphing, this is what's going to happen next. And what's going on.
Kind of reminds me of the imbecilic way I sometimes dealt with my kids, warning them and saying, this time I really mean it. Now I'm serious.
Yeah, good. Rick.
Yeah, hi. I'm just going back and forth with the last time we had Bo El Paro when I went to Ul, when we're looking for Ul. It's Va'era, verse 26. I just wanted to point out, since we're talking about how there's differences, I don't know. But there you have Bo El Paro, and it ends with Shalach et ami v'ya'avduni, that verse 26. So here, we don't get that until the end of verse 3. Shalach ami v'ya'avduni. So there's all these extra things explaining what God wants Moses and Aaron to do. I'm just saying that there in verse 26, it was very terse. It was very short.
Rick, what chapter? Because I don't see that.
7, sorry, with the frogs. I went back looking for the last bow, and that's what I found. Chapter 7, verse 26. So you have Bo El Paro there with the same Ul in Onkelos, and then it ends Shalach et ami.
Got it. Yeah.
So I thought you might want to see that as comparison between the two.
Got it. Great. Thank you, Rick. It really is the case that the quote-unquote simplest of the Rashis take the most amount of time to work through, because that's a short 2-word Rashi. Joanna had to leave, and she was in the middle of a Rashi. The next Rashi is 50% longer than this Rashi. It's a 3-word Rashi, so that should take us probably then 66% of the time to go through it, because it's an inverse relationship. Joel, do you want to read the next Rashi?
We're in the middle of our own plague here, the plague of cold.
Are you cold?
Freezing.
I'm comfortable.
God. Shati Sumi She Asit Ani.
Ashit ani. Okay, so the first thing that Rashi does is translate shiti into sumi, and it sounds like you're speaking. We're speaking Ugaritic. Doesn't even sound Hebrew. This is a gerund with the first person possessive, right? So sumi is from the verb lasim, to place. Sumi is my placing, right? And that's a more common Hebrew verb, right? Simit zeh b'shulchan, put it on the table. In modern Hebrew, for sure. In biblical Hebrew, both are used. And so he's saying if you can't decipher shiti, you can decipher sumi, my placing, and read that back into the verse. We already did this as we translated, in order that there will be my placing of my signs in his midst. And then he turns the gerund with the possessive into a verb, she'ashit ani, that I myself maybe will do the placing, right? That I'm going to be the one, making sure that he's going to suffer through all this. So here, the answer to the question that Rashi is answering is more easy to determine, which is, what does shiti mean if you're confused by it? Sometimes Rashi is just concerned that the reader might not have that understanding of the word, and his answer is, I'll give you a word that you are likely to understand better than the other one. Okay. Questions or comments on that? I do want to hear your comment, Joel.
Pharaoh says, that's a shitty thing to do. And he says, sue me.
Could you hear that on Zoom? Because if you did, you're in a better situation than we are. Joel. Okay. Shkaya. All right. Let's go to the next verse. Joel, you still have the microphone. Again, speak as projectedly as possible.
ולמען תספר באוזני בנך ובן בנך את אשר התעללתי במצרים ואת ototai asher samti bam vidatem ki ani Adonai.
Okay. Some of these phrases are going to be easy to translate. Some of them are going to be harder.
Okay, I don't know if this is still part of the quote.
It is because it's a continuation of Lama'an, right? So we had, I've hardened his heart and his Pharaoh's in order that, A, I get to place more plagues in his midst, Ulaman, and in order that.
And in order that you shall tell to the ears of your son, singular, and the son of your son, everything that I have done. Italalti.
We'll linger on that a second. The root is ayin lamed lamed. It means lots of potential things. In modern Hebrew, I think the plot of a novel is an alilah, right? So sometimes it can mean just what happened, right? But it can also mean something more specific. So that you can tell your son and your son's sons that which I have allowed. We'll hold it as a non-translated word yet. Yeah.
In Mitzrayim, and my signs which I placed on them.
And notice that here the Torah uses the verb for place, samti, that Rashi used to explain what shiti meant, right? So I'd forgotten to mention that before. Not only was Rashi translating, he's translating it using the very verb that the Torah is about to use clearly for the same thing, right?
And so that they shall know that.
Who shall know?
Oh, you shall know that I am the Lord.
Right, and that distinction is significant because the first ulaman is so that I, God, get to flex my muscles in Pharaoh's midst. The second laman is that you tell the story about all the things I did to Pharaoh. And why do I want you to tell the story? Because I want you to know, and I want your descendants to know that I'm God, right? So we have here in the end of verse 1 and the beginning of verse 2, the two primary rationales given by the Torah to explain why all of this happened so slowly and dramatically, right? Part of it, if you'll excuse me saying, is divine ego. I want to show Pharaoh that I'm boss, and part of it is another version of divine ego. I want you to worship me. I want the people who leave Egypt to ultimately be connected to me. So I want them to know how amazing I am, right? And if you want to say it slightly less cynically, I want this story to be memorable so that 3,000 years from now, they're still telling it, which we are. Tova.
I wonder, this partly came to mind because at the recent Seder, when I was thinking about Pesach, it occurred to me really for the first time that when the Israelites mark their doors, it's really the first time we see Bnei Yisrael doing anything in this story. I may be contradicted as we read the last plagues, but they don't really have a part in what we've been reading, and we really don't know how they are reacting to it. And that's the first time that they have to take an action that claims themselves to be Bnei Yisrael. And so I'm wondering how much of this is this prolonging and the signs is really building a people, creating a people.
Great. It's like, I don't know why this is the analogy in my mind, the difference between pouring a sauce over something you're cooking and letting it marinate, right? And letting it seep in. That if this all happens in one fell swoop, it's both amazing and forgettable, right? You ever experience something surprising and big, and then a day later you even question yourself, like, did that really happen? Right? But if something is extended, it lingers in your mind a different way. So I think that's apt. Norm, and then Marshall. Yeah.
I also want to refer to Passover Seder, and in the four lines that are the core of the Magid and the Seder that come from Deuteronomy, from Devarim, one of them really is primarily about signs and wonders to convince the Israelites that he is God. And so that's completely consistent with what we're reading right now.
Zoomers, Hector just walked into the room. Did it get better or no?
No.
Halfway through the session, Hector, we changed nothing. All of a sudden, the Zoomers cannot hear us like they used to. It got muffled and hard for them to hear. So we'll keep going. Hector's going to tinker. Marshall?
I just want to go back to the second sentence for a second, that the word is shiti, with the stress is on the last syllable.
The first sentence, the second half of the first sentence. Yeah.
Right. In contrast to samti, where the stress is on the first syllable. So I couldn't figure out why Rashi
That's
was making a
fixed.
comment, ashit.
Wait,
Fixed now.
Fixed it, Rick?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Hector. Okay. Hector's a miracle worker. Hector. Signs and wonders. Okay. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Marshall. Okay.
wait. It got muffled again.
Yeah,
Say
it's
something.
It's coming in and out.
All right. Hector,
It's in.
Zoomers, he's working on it. We're gonna do the best we can. We're gonna maximize these last 10 minutes. So hopefully he'll refix it. Yes, Marshall.
I don't think it's a sign of old age where I'm repeating myself.
What'd you say?
Going back to sentence 2, where we had shiti.
The first half of sentence 1. You're making me repeat myself. Okay, so why it's the emphasis?
Where shiti, and that Rashi commented, ashit, I will place, indicating it's a future tense, looks like a past tense verb.
Right.
In contrast to the current verse, samti, which is clearly a past tense verb, where I have already placed these signs.
Right. Right, because verse 2 is how do I say this? Is God looking into the future so that they can then reminisce about what I did, whereas verse 1 is so that I can do this in the present tense, but the present tense means the future tense, meaning so that I'm about to set up and do this. Yeah. The other reason why the emphasis in the different syllable is that it's just a different form of speech. Shiti is a noun, right? My placing, and the verb samti is a pure verb that I have placed. Tova? Hector, I should admit you? Okay. Make the other me co-host. Hold on a second.
Just going back to the point that I made about the reason for prolonging the plagues, I think it also struck me because in this verse we have Beozne vinha vin binha, which introduces the generations. I mean, that's like defining a people, because a people is being created and it's going to have this ongoing tradition.
Yeah.
And the fact that that is in this context, I think strengthens that argument.
Great, and that connects to what Norm said, right? The way Pesach remembers the story is that it becomes a telling, a Haggadah, right? And I think you're right. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, that this is the first place in the narrative where the notion of this being told through the generations is emphasized. Rick.
Okay, right along those lines, now that you're speaking about the two reasons, the trope, if I could do a trope drash, on the first time for Pharaoh, it's a revia. It's okay. It's not that dramatic. It's not that important. But the ma'an for us, for the Israelites, you got a pazer, which is kind of rare. I was looking for the last one. I didn't find it yet. But so the Torah is saying, trope-wise, it's much more important for the Israelites to know and the retelling than for the bad guys to know, if you want to take it that way.
No, that's really nice, right? Whether or not it's intended, it's really nice, because there is a distinction between leman and depending on how you do the pazer, uleman. That's the pazer I learned. I think Rick has one slightly less, elaborate, leman, something like that, right?
Yes.
Right. But either way, it's however I sang the word last time, I'm going to sing it bigger now, and I want you that one's the more significant reason. That's a wonderful comment. Thank you for that. Okay. I'm thinking out loud here. Do I want to read the translations of Hidalalti before or after we do Rashi? Let's do the Rashi, because the translations will kind of give away some of the fun. Joel, can you read? And we're clearly not going to get through all this, but let's start it.
Hitalalti. Sichakti,
which means
I
teased, right? In modern Hebrew, sichakti would be, I played. I think the word that I mocked, I toyed with. It's sachak and tzachak are examples of the rarer places where it's the last two letters of the root rather than the first two letters of the root that create a family. So sachek to play and tzachek to laugh are clearly connected to each other. In fact, there are places in the Bible where the character Yitzchak, not in the Torah, is referred to as Yitzchak. Does anyone know the most common liturgical place where there's a verse? This is like trivia, where the verse is referencing that character's name is referenced, and it's Yitzchak, not Yitzchak. In the bris ceremony. In the bris ceremony, you recite a verse, and I forgot exactly where exactly it's from in the Tanakh, but it references Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So the Bible has a version of his name where it's Sachek, not Sachek. Some of you know the Nachman Bialik poem Sachki, right? Which it's always emotional for me. I'm bringing this up because it's just in my mind. My Saba, my grandfather, who was a Reform rabbi, because he was the smiliest and gentlest man to live, in my humble opinion. His nickname from age 20 was Sachki, because he loved Hebrew literature, and he had that personality. And to this day, when I meet people who are alive or and who knew him, they know him as Sachki more than they know him as Rabbi Bernard Kligfeld. But it has to do with like something as sweet as to play. Here it's something more sinister, right? Right? That Rashi saying, you may not know the verb, but it means kind of play toy with. Interestingly, he turns a hitpa'el verb. Hit alalti is reflexive, right? The root is ayin lamed lamed, and lehit alel means to do it to yourself. But it's interesting because it's I did it to myself to Egypt. Not every reflexive verb is translated, in English, and even in the Hebrew-speaking mind back then, in a reflexive way, right? Because it's God is not doing something to God's self. Et asher hitalalti b'mitzrayim, that which I did something to myself to Egypt, Rashi is intentionally turning it into a verb which does not sound reflexive, that I toyed with. Okay. Kamo
ki hitalalt bo bi.
Okay, kamo hitalalt bi. I'm going to share the screen. This is from Parshat Balak, and this is Bilam talking to the donkey, okay, who has, according to from Bilam's perspective, has blocked his way and is basically mocked him. Look up verse 28. Vayiftach Adonai et piha aton. God opened up the mouth of the donkey. Vatomer leVilam, and the donkey said to Bilam, Meh asiti lecha. What have I done to you? Ki hikitani zeh shalosh regalim, that you hit me for Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuot. No, different shalosh regalim. That you hit me these 3 times. Vayomer Bilam la'aton. Bilam said back to the donkey, Ki hit alalta bi. You toyed with me. You were mocking me. Again, this is not only Rashi is bringing this, I believe, not only to show you that in this, it's obvious what it means in this context, and it's slightly more obvious than it was in ours. And it's another time where the verb lehit alel looks reflexive, but it's not operating reflexively in the verse. Okay, that's the first verse Rashi shows us. Leonard, you're the microphone, so go ahead.
I was going to say in the Elah, we have the song El Nora Alila, but it must mean something different there.
Yes, El Nora Alila. It's the first thing we sing after the quiet Amidah of Ne'ilah, different tunes. El Nora Alila, El Nora. I think that has to do with exalted, like Al, like the God who is Nora, who is awesome, and Alila, who is exalted and upper. Yeah, and I think that's building off of Al, Ayin Lam, and Al, and the lamed is added at some point in the root, I believe. I think that's understood there. Okay, do one more, and then we'll have to pause. Joel? Oh, Joel left. All right. Okay, so I'll do it. V'chein, and if you want another verse, halo kasher hitalel bahem. Okay, let's look at this context. This is going to be a less familiar context unless you are a scholar of the first book of Samuel. Okay, first book of Samuel, this scene, without getting too much into it, is that the Philistines have temporarily stolen the ark. Right, the war. We've been battling the Philistines for quite a long time, and basically, outside priests are warning the Philistines, don't mess with this people and mess with this God, because remember what they've done to other enemies. That's the context. So, first book of Samuel, chapter 6, verse 6. It's on this. Oh, I didn't share the screen yet. I'm sorry. Hold on. And we'll end with this. V'lama tichabdu et levavchem. Why are you hardening your hearts? It's interesting, translated here by JPS says, why meaning don't, right? That's a common way, right? Like, why are you doing that is basically my way of saying you shouldn't be doing it. Interesting that this is a verse that's not only going to have the verb, but has to do with hardening of hearts. Kasher kibdu mitzrayim ufaro et libam, just as Egypt and Pharaoh. Interesting that in the book of Samuel, it's reversed. It's not Pharaoh and the Egyptians, but Egypt and Pharaoh hardened their hearts. Hello, don't you remember? Kasher hit alel bahem. God toyed with them. God played with them. Vayishalchum. And ultimately, they were forced. This is kind of Lashon Katsar. They were forced to let them go, and they left. So you have ancient priests warning the Philistines, this is not going to go well with you. What's interesting about Rashi's using this as a proof text is that it's circular, because at least in the Bilam example, it's a use of the verb that is not in our narrative, and the meaning is clear. Here, Rashi is just pointing to another verse where this scene is being reminisced about, so that if we didn't know what this scene meant, this verb wouldn't help us. So I'm not sure exactly why he's adding this proof text. To me, it doesn't add that much. We'll call it there. We'll pick up in the middle of the Rashi next week. Welcome again to Paul. Have a good week, everybody. Early Shabbat Shalom.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.